Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking one of the most famous and, let's be honest, frankly bizarre biblical stories and completely breaking it down. We're not looking at this as some quaint Sunday school miracle. No, we're going to deconstruct this narrative as a highly calculated, high-stakes, cosmic military rescue mission. Seriously, this was a tactical strike. Okay, let's dive into this. Because the entire operation hinges on a deeply weird question. Why on earth did 6,000 demons literally fall on their knees and beg to be sent into a herd of pigs? I mean, think about the surreal nature of that negotiation for a second. What kind of bizarre logic drives an occupying spiritual force to actually beg for farm animals? Well, to understand that, you really have to grasp the sheer impossible scale of the enemy here. 6,000. That's the estimated strength of a fully armed Roman military unit. But in this context, it represents 6,000 ancient spiritual entities occupying the mind and body of just one single human being. It's just a staggering, suffocating concentration of darkness.
And directly contrasting that impossible internal number is the massive, physical target of their desperation. 2,000. A towering hillside covered in 2,000 grazing pigs. The demons see this huge herd, and they calculate their only chance for survival. But how did we even get to this bizarre standoff in the first place? Let's trace the mission right from the beginning.
Phase 1. A one-man invasion.
This was a deliberate, calculated assault straight into hostile territory. Jesus didn't just stumble onto this beach by accident, right? He orchestrated every single move. On the western shore, he had this incredible ministry momentum. He's in Jewish territory, surrounded by roaring crowds, experiencing wild success. But then, he purposely leaves it all behind. He steers his boat directly toward the eastern shore, the Gentile Decapolis. He literally left the safety of the crowds to head straight into a ritually polluted wasteland filled with pagan temples and unclean graveyards.
Phase 2. The spiritual blockade. Now, what's really interesting here is at the moment that boat left the shore, a furious storm attacked it. The waves were violently swamping the boat, but the text doesn't frame this as just some freak weather event. It's portrayed as a targeted spiritual defense mechanism. The enemy knew exactly who was in that boat and exactly where he was heading. Notice the Greek word used in the source material, epitomao. It means to rebuke with absolute authority. Mark uses this exact same word to describe Jesus silencing demonic entities in other chapters. He spoke to the storm exactly the way he speaks to demons. It heavily implies the squall was an actual entity trying to sink the mission before it ever reached the shore.
But, of course, Jesus pushes through. He steps onto the beach and walks straight into 6 overwhelming layers of mosaic defilement. Think about this. He is in Gentile territory, walking through unclean tombs, surrounded by dead bodies, to meet a naked, bleeding man in a land of pigs. It is a staggering, towering wall of impurity. Absolutely no religious law, no rabbi, no priest could ever penetrate this zone. But he just walks right through it.
Phase 3. The demonic military occupation.
Out of those tombs comes a lone man. But honestly, calling him just a sick man almost misses the sheer tragedy of it. The source describes a systemic dismantling of a human being from the inside out. First, he was stripped of his dignity and left naked. Second, his own hands were turned into weapons against himself through self-mutilation. Third, he was completely exiled to live among the dead in the tombs. And finally, society just wrote him off completely, leaving only snapped iron chains as proof they'd given up on him. They abandoned him as a living ghost. But Jesus? Jesus saw past the monster, straight to the man.
And this brilliantly illustrates a mind-blowing piece of historical trivia. The demons inside him call themselves Legion. A legion was a Roman military unit of about 6,000 soldiers. Specifically, the Legio Ex Fretensis dominated this exact region. And do you know what their primary military standard, their mascot was? A wild boar. A pig. So this wasn't just a random possession, it's portrayed as a demonic force claiming spiritual territory, literally mocking the physical Roman occupation with their very name.
But here's the thing. These 6,000 entities were terrified, not just of Jesus, but of a very specific place, the abyssos, or the abyss. In the context of the era, this wasn't a metaphor. It was understood as a specific, functioning cosmic holding cell in the unfathomable deep, meant for fallen angels waiting for judgment. The demonic legion knew their kind was already locked inside it. They were absolutely terrified of being sent there, which is exactly why they begged for a physical host in order to survive.
Phase 4. The tactical pig strike.
So here is the absolute climax of the operation. The 6,000 demons negotiate to enter the massive herd of 2,000 pigs. They actually think they've outsmarted the carpenter. They think they've found a lifeboat to stay in the region and avoid the abyss. But it results in this incredibly dramatic, poetic reversal. The enemy's weapon, that stormy sea that was meant to drown the rescue team just an hour earlier, becomes heaven's weapon. Because the moment the demons enter the pigs, the entire herd plunges off the cliff and drowns in the sea. The narrative shows Christ taking the very weapon aimed at him and using it as a cosmic execution chamber for the total plunging destruction of the occupying force. The demons didn't negotiate an escape at all. They negotiated their own execution.
Phase 5. The cost of one soul.
You see, the surreal aftermath of this strike isn't just about a freed man. It's about the staggering economic devastation left in the wake of this rescue. Just break down the sheer math here. A single pig in the first century was worth about 1 to 2 days of a laborer's wages. So 2,000 pigs? That is the equivalent of 6 to 11 years of regional wealth, literally wiped out in seconds. Jesus completely collapsed a sector of the regional economy, establishing a literal, massive price tag for one single thrown-away human soul.
Which leads to a pretty terrifying calculation. An entire town came out, weighed a decade of wealth against a free, clothed man sitting in his right mind, and they chose the wealth. It is such a tragic irony. The people were far more disturbed by the economic loss than they ever were by the demonic possession. They actually begged Jesus to leave their region, just like the demons did. His presence was just too costly for them.
Phase 6. Heaven's first Gentile ambassador.
So the crucial point is, honoring their request, Jesus gets back in the boat, and the restored man runs up and begs to go with him. He wants to leave that graveyard behind forever. But Jesus gives him a surprising, historic commission instead, which is a complete reversal of his normal operating procedure. Usually, Jesus operates under the messianic secret in Jewish territory, telling people, hey, don't tell anyone, to avoid triggering a political uprising. But here, in Gentile territory, he launches the Decapolis mission, go tell everyone. He completely reversed his normal rule of silence because in a pagan land, they don't care about Torah scholarship, right? They need raw, breathing, undeniable evidence. And this healed man was the ultimate evidence.
And the text suggests his testimony absolutely worked. Sometime later, Jesus returns to this exact same region, and instead of begging him to leave, a massive crowd is waiting for him. He ends up feeding 4,000 people. To put that into perspective, this proves the explosive effectiveness of this one broken man's testimony spreading like wildfire through those 10 cities.
And it wasn't just a random crowd either. There were exactly 7 leftover baskets collected that day. 7 is the biblical number of divine completeness. It symbolized that the Gentile harvest in this region was completely ready, all because one shattered man became an ambassador and bravely told his story.
The whole narrative really ties back to this one powerful thought. Deliverance does not begin with power. It begins when someone sees you. I mean, Jesus' very first act when he stepped onto that terrifying shore wasn't to shout commands or show off his immense power. No, he looked past 6,000 screaming demons and simply asked the man, "What is your name?" He sought out the human being buried underneath all that trauma.
Jesus told him to go home and share his story, establishing this incredible theme that a person's worst chapter can actually become their primary credential. The narrative presents such a profound idea that the man's scars and his darkest past became the ultimate proof of his redemption. In this story, the enemy's permanent trophy becomes heaven's ultimate ambassador.
As we wrap up this explainer, the story leaves us with a really provocative final thought. If an entire regional economy, a literal decade of wealth, was purposefully destroyed to rescue one single abandoned man in a graveyard, what is the price tag of a soul? It's a narrative that challenges us to consider the unfathomable lengths this rescue mission was willing to cross for a single human life. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep questioning everything.